Growing up, I had dreams and aspirations, but always felt like the kid that didn't fit in. For the most part, I wasn't a bad kid, but when I made the transition into adulthood, I turned to the streets for guidance. This led to getting locked up in juvenile hall, doing time in CYA, and eventually a 120-month sentence in federal prison. I had a lot of time to think and reflect during my federal sentence, so I share with you what I learned, hoping I can positively influence someone else's life with Prison Talk.
916, getting down with another fresh out prison talk. I had a question somebody asked me, and they were saying, Big Herc, what do the majority of guys spend their time in prison doing? And most guys in prison spend their time getting high, watching TV, playing sports, politicking, and making spreads. A lot of the guys aren't in there fighting to try to get out early. If you were to go into the average unit in a prison and said, hey, new law passed, everybody released. We're going to release everybody, halfway house. You're going to, home confinement if you got a place to go. If you don't, we'll put you in a halfway house. A lot of the guys would look around, look back at the TV, look at their bowl of top ramen soup, and probably continue eating their soup. There's not a lot of fight in the guys in prison when it comes to wanting to press for their rights to be free and to rehabilitate. The guys rehabilitating are a handful who have decided to make a change. They're in there taking classes. They're studying maybe a trade in there. You can, places, some of them have, HVAC and different trades, dental, different things that will benefit you when you get out. But the average guy is not doing too much of anything. It's just like a grown-up daycare. It's pretty crazy, man. I mean, I used to go to the law library, and I would spend majority of my time in the law library and come back into the unit right before the yard recall, and there would be just hundreds of guys sitting around a TV watching TV. Sports, soap operas, music videos. It's crazy, man. And I would be like, how could all these gangsters, criminals, thugs, gang members be content with just hanging out? But then you come to the realization that, the labeling is kind of a way to vilify or put a name to a certain type of individual. Some of these guys really aren't so much as gangsters or gang members. They kind of by default had to fall into that. A lot of the guys are very intelligent. You have a lot. I've talked to guys who are tatted up, who can tell you more about U.S. history, more about conflicts in foreign countries, things about science that would blow your mind, but they never applied that stuff on the streets because of just the circumstances. See, a lot of people grow up in places where those places mentally have created almost like a bubble, and they feel that they're limited in what they can pursue. I mean, a lot of that has changed and is changing, but a lot of these guys don't realize their true potential till they get to prison and have a time to sit down and reflect. Some guys reflect, some guys don't reflect, but a lot of guys, they just go to prison and hang out. You got one or two guards babysitting 100 and something inmates. The guys, are pretty much policing themselves. You got somebody running the gambling table, somebody running the drugs in the unit, somebody running the hooch in the unit. This guy, he's the TV guy at a certain time. This guy's a TV guy at another time. Um, it's a really sad situation, man. And if there was more resources, I feel that these individuals had in the neighborhoods they grew up on the street, you probably wouldn't have as many of those guys in prison. But there would also be less need for all these private prisons. They would be out of business. That's why they don't put the effort into these impacted areas to clean it up and to really make a difference in maybe shaping some of these young men so that they don't lead to the path of prison. Because a lot of these guys, to be honest, they should have just had a job. They get in prison, they don't have, their families are poor. These guys, in their early 20s, late teens, they didn't make no money on the street. They barely have a relationship with a female. They get into prison, they're broke, they go and work a job, or they get in there and they try to hustle, don't know what the hell they're doing. They're like crash dummies. Some guys, they can't hustle if their life depended on it because they're using a product they're trying to hustle. Other guys go to work in these factories and basically spend their money uh, on food and drugs. And so it's a repetitive cycle in there. You got a handful of guys that are taking college courses. They've pretty much been ostracized, so they kind of stick to themselves. Because if you're doing that, you don't have time to hang out. But prison is not a place where you go to elevate yourself, to take your spiritual levels to heights. I mean, you can, and you think like, wow, if I can do it in prison, I can do it on the street, and you can. But think about if you would have realized that before, and all the effort you put into the stuff that led to prison, if you would have did that on the street. A lot of guys don't even think about that. All the effort they put into hanging out, claiming a street corner, claiming a hood, claiming a city, funking with this dude, tripping with this guy, fighting over this female. If they would have put all that into productive assets, maybe it's, pulling your money together for a business, buying a building in a community, putting together a corner store with healthy products, a learning center. I mean, dude, you know how that would change? The whole demographic. I always feel like if you are somebody in a community and you have kids or you see someone else has kids, don't you want those kids and young people to be better than what you were, to grow up to be greater than what you were? And I never got like the excitement when people would see their homies roll up and they're all excited and pumped up. It's like, man, you guys are happy to be regrouping in prison. Yeah, it's a pretty dismal place. I mean, people, you see them now. A lot of the guys on the Tucci and they're getting high and they're running around there, participating in just the different politics stuff and it's like they're trying to romanticize prison, and there's nothing to be romanticized about prison, man. And I'm sitting right now in my backyard, peaceful, you know, listening to the birds. I hear the pool pump going, and I'm like, why would I want to trade this for prison? Why would, any young man who, if he felt there was greater opportunity, why would he want to entertain that? And growing up, you have people who you look up to, people who raise you, and you might be somewhat you feel limited by the place that you live in, but when you think about, like, hey man, if I catch the bus over here or go down here, you gotta you gotta make a greater effort, and you gotta try to make that greater effort for your young ones. You guys that are out there who have been in prison coming out, you gotta tell these kids the truth, man. You gotta let them know that it's straight garbage, man, and they need you to go to prison in order to work in them factories, in order to keep that prison industrial complex going. Otherwise, they couldn't make no money off their stocks. Those private prisons could not exist. That's why when you look at the behavior, there's not a lot of emphasis on changing the behavior in those communities, and they're so quick to fund everybody else but those in those communities. Those people could be just as productive. We don't need to send money over to foreign countries and bring in a bunch of illegals. All we got to do is focus on the American workforce. We have a lot of people here that are in prison that actually aren't bad people, that should have the opportunity to have a great job. Because a lot of these guys, you go to the prison, they're working in prison 8 hours a day. You have to have a job in prison. It's nothing. Like I said, guys who are talking all the tough stuff. There's places for those guys. There's level fours. There's USPs. There's people in there who are just really inmate convict. But for the most part, man, a lot of these guys are just in there getting high. These guys are in there running around, crashing out, doing stupid stuff, gambling debts, um, playing prison politics. They're not a threat, man. You know, um, the ones who were out here shooting up everything. See, those guys, they got tricked into a cold trick bag, and now, by the time they ever even maybe get action, they're an old grandpa. 17, 18, you done shot somebody, man, and then you pass out in court, and now you up in there, don't nobody care. You took a life, man. You think there's no consequence. There's a lot of guys in there, you talk to them, man, and they regret what they did. They regret the fact that they threw their life away on something that really had no meaning. And you're sitting in a cage now, living in hell. There's not a lot of guys in prison fighting for their rights. Because, like I said, their education is very low. So they don't understand the legal language, and they're intimidated to go even try to challenge the legal language. And then on top of it, if they try to challenge it, their friends that they were hanging out with is going to give them shit. And now they stop hanging out, they might get pressed by their own homies because they're trying to educate themselves. So you have that. If you're in there and you were somebody who was walking the track and hanging out, and now you're trying to go to school and do this, you might have one or two homies that will support you, but the majority, because they're ignorant and because of just their mind state. See, certain people, you can't even rationalize with them. There's certain people in prison, you don't even want to talk to them and get in a conversation because you don't realize the mentality. It's just like people on the street. Some of these people, you can't talk to them. You look at their political opinions, you look at their family values. You like, man, there's no saving those people, man. You just got to let them be. It's the same thing in prison. Some of those people, man, they're there for a reason. They're there for a reason. But the majority of the guys in there, they go to a job, but they have, they don't have the responsibility of taking care of their family. So they got a wife or baby mama out there running around raising their kids, and they talk to them on the phone. That's not being a parent. It's not being a father. You're absentee, man. You're having no impact on that child's life. No little 4 or 5 hour, 6 hour visit it's not like being in the house every day and that kid feeling like, they have a parental presence, and there's a consequence if they mess up. That if they do something, their dad is gonna put their foot down and, you know, make sure they're not hanging out with the wrong crowd. Because there's always gonna be a wrong crowd out there. There's a wrong crowd in every city. There's always a wrong crowd. There's a wrong crowd in prison. But it's not what you guys think. And it's sad when everybody's glorifying like the crimes these guys did before to make a bunch of money, and everybody's like, oh man, that guy. Well, why don't that guy tell the real story about like how many guys are in there and people that are in there that are just basically, man, I felt like a loser. I was a loser. I had bought into the whole, crime stuff, and I went to jail, and I was a loser. Could have been out doing something more productive, man. See, a lot of guys don't want to admit that. Oh, I was a G. I worked out too. I studied. I fought hard and filed a lot of paperwork in court, but I felt like a loser, man, because I allowed myself to make choices that got me into a situation where somebody else ran my life. So prison, what people are doing in there, nothing. Watching TV, working, getting high, making spreads. That's what they're doing. It shouldn't be glorified, shouldn't be put on a pedestal. We need to make the reality as real as possible so that some of these youngsters can be saved, man. You always catch a lot of shit because people are like, oh man, who you'd be trying to tell people, well, I lived a life, man. I'm not. What you mean because I made some mistakes? I can't come out here and share something to hopefully help some of these other young people? What are you doing? Big Herc 916, fresh out.